welcome to the How to Man podcast. My name is Austin Dworsk, and today I thought we would go ahead and discuss poetry. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Poetry is like among the least masculine things that a man can partake in, and that is where I would argue with you, hypothetical straw man sir. You are wrong. Poetry for ages has been probably one of the manliest pursuits that anybody could have, and among the noblest pursuits in writing. The modern age has kind of developed this idea of man with the extreme emphasis on stoicism and with the desire for success, that we had to be basically robots. The only things that matter is hitting the objective, and anything that does not align with the objective of getting paid, getting laid, Gatorade. Points to you if you know what that's a reference to. But anything that interferes with getting the girl, getting the big fat stacks of money, and getting the fancy cars and the high status and whatnot is considered irrelevant. Nothing else matters beyond being physically fit and how many girls you can lay, and that's not historically accurate. For men of the past, our ancestors, there were a ton of things that mattered far more than just getting rich or getting the girl. And poetry was among those things that kind of helped highlight those more emotional desires and whatnot. It was also offered an outlet for men to even express themselves because back then it was important for men to be stoic and to have perfect emotional control and to never let emotions control them. But poetry was a way for them to kind of build up a bit more, or to act as a valve to allow some of those more difficult emotions to process out and to kind of work through their thoughts and feelings. So, what is poetry? That is an important question to ask. There are a lot of philosophical debates about poetry, and to be entirely honest, I did attempt to do a lot of research on this topic, but unfortunately, when you look up the science of poetry or the psychology of poetry or anything like that, all you get is the poetry of science or the poetry of psychology. The exact opposite of what I'm looking for. And instead of me trying to figure out, or instead of articles or things talking about how poetry works and how it affects your mind and, the benefits of poetry and stuff like that, all I got was, how beautiful science is and how, artfully and emotionally pleasing science is, which is not what science is supposed to be. Science is supposed to be, very, very hard, logical thinking, and poetry is very emotional, creative thinking. They're basically polar opposites. They work well together, and I'm not trying to bash this whole thing on science where, if you think science is poetic, then, you're just crazy. But I am trying to kind of emphasize the fact that they are technically polar opposites, that when you get them to work together well, you can effectively make magic happen. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I was just trying to find something along the lines of reading a poem a day can affect this part of your brain structure, or has this ability to boost happiness by this percentage or something like that. But honestly, poetically, there was nothing like that. Nobody's done any scientific research on poetry, and poetry is probably one of the most complicated things to even discuss. Everybody knows it You'll know it when you see it, but you try to explain it to somebody, and it's, like trying to explain the color red to somebody who's never seen colors in their life. So, poetry, by my definition, is a art form that is akin to painting or sculpting, utilizing linguistic structures to create more more refined descriptions of abstract ideas. So it's a complicated, long definition. I could have gone with the dictionary definition for poetry, but I feel like it's more important to give my own personal take on it than it is to go with some standardized, very, very sterile, bland definition of poetry, because poetry is not supposed to be bland. So anyway, poetry is unique in the sense that it is approachable to just about anybody. Humans are built around our linguistic capabilities. There are like 3 areas of our brains that are incredibly important. And the first area is the frontal lobe, our logic and higher thinking capabilities. This is how we problem solve, and humans are the ultimate in problem solvers. It's literally like the main thing that makes us the dominant species, is the fact that we can solve problems better than any other animal on the planet. Second part is our visual area. That's like our second biggest area of our brain. Our eyes are incredibly important to us. It's actually how we developed our pattern recognition and our ability to recognize colors and all of these other things. So much of our lives are dependent on our eyes, to the point where it even affects communication. If you're not standing face to face with somebody, you are losing like more than 50% of communicative context with somebody. You don't see their hand gestures, like you don't see mine right now as I'm recording this podcast. You don't see their facial expressions. You don't see how they react to what you say to them and stuff. And then, like just a little bit under 30%, or just a little bit under 40% is auditorial information, which is tone, how somebody says something, if they say something angry, or if they say something surprised, stuff like that. And then the very, very last bit is the actual text, or the actual words that are being used. And this is the reason why flame wars start so easily online, because you don't get the added information, and you will almost always misread tone. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody post something and I was like, wait a minute, that's not right at all. And then I actually had to think about it and was like, oh, they probably mean the other way. They didn't mean to insult anybody. They weren't insulting anybody anyway. They were just saying something, else. Tone matters, and poetry is playing with linguistics, and linguistics is like the second most important part of our brain. Being a social and emotional species with pattern recognition and stuff like that, being able to communicate with other people was especially important. A human by themselves could survive on their own, but their chances of survival immediately skyrocket the more people you add to the group. A single person surviving in the woods on their own could do it. Like I said, we are built for problem solving, and not having anything to survive in the woods, is a major problem. But the more brains you have to solve the problem, the easier it is to actually, make improvements, to figure out how things work, and to better adapt to the situation. So when it comes to humans, communication is especially important, because we can't communicate telepathically. I can't just convey my thoughts to you and you know exactly what I think. I have to explain them in a way that you will understand in order to get my thoughts over to you. And this is one of the reasons why, high level thinking gets incredibly verbose as, incredibly difficult concepts, such as literally talking about thinking requires a ton of just comparative thinking and explaining terms that are really, really abstract and having to use a ton of metaphors in order to really, really get the idea through. I've been listening to Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning for like the fourth time, trying to get through it, and it is incredibly dense. I think chapter 2 is 12 hours. Just to get through one chapter, it's 12 hours, and that's literally like the main crux of the book is, chapter 2 is Maps of Meaning, how we map our thinking and stuff. And it's just so much information all to describe one thing. And I'm still not sure I understand. I'm probably going to have to listen to it again. But that being said, poetry is playing with the linguistic structures. Painting is playing with lines and how we perceive things and how we portray colors and stuff like that. And sculpture is playing with like the physical form in a 3D space and trying to replicate things that we see in real life through a non-living medium and trying to get it as close to accurate as possible. Some of the most beautiful effects in sculpture is how you can go see some sculptures in Italy and they have veils that look like they're just gently placed on there and it looks like fabric, but the entire thing was sculpted. And the best part is it looks like it's transparent, despite the fact that it's all one solid piece of marble. So poetry is very similar to those concepts, but it's specifically linguistics. It's playing with rhythm, it's playing with how we speak, it's playing with rhymes and alliteration and the fact that words can mean multiple things. It's playing with puns. Shakespeare's conversation between Romeo and Mercutio, when Mercutio tells him, he has to have soul in order to be able to dance, and Romeo responds back with, your soul is as light as a feather, while my souls are filled with lead. And that's playing with pun, talking about how he's somebody who is very free and open, while he, doesn't have rhythm or the ability to dance. He feels like he has leaden feet, and stuff like that. So poetry is one of like the most creative adventures that you can do, and since as a species linguistics is like one of the most basic things humans can do, basically, as long as a child, a baby is around people, they're gonna learn language. It doesn't even matter how intelligent they are. Almost every single person is capable of learning how to communicate with their fellow humans, and so poetry is like one of the most approachable things that you can get to, and anybody can, just do any poem. That being said, like any art form, there are some that are usually seen as bad. Just look at any modern art exhibit, and you're going to be hard pressed to find good art. Modern day poetry is kind of not good. We seem to have ceded poetry because, in the past, in like the 17 and 1600s and stuff, poetry was very, very much a masculine pursuit. It was a way to express philosophical ideas and to describe epic wars and to help process tragedies and stuff like that, as well as to woo fair maidens that we might be interested in. And a way to kind of just show your intelligence and your intellectual capabilities through poetry and stuff like that. And now we seem to have ceded the ground to feminists who all they want to do is, slam men for their privilege and promote this idea of patriarchy and stuff like that. And it's very shallow. There's almost like no depth to what they say. It's very, very observational, and it doesn't even really think about what they're actually looking at. So keep in mind, we're going to be focusing more on classic poetry because that's where most of the good stuff has survived from, and whatnot. So some things that I wanted to bring up. Where am I at in my talk? Another thing about poetry is poetry was one of the earliest ways that we used to communicate complex ideas, such as how one should live, how to hunt, how to fight a war, how to fulfill your role in society. Most of our legends and religious stories were told in a more poetic sense. Just if you look at the Bible, Torah, Quran, anything like that, the wording and the structure of it is very poetic in nature. It uses a lot of similes and metaphors, as well as very abstract descriptions of things, as it's talking about very abstract ideas of God and how to operate in the world. And it was important to really convey that in a way that nearly anybody can pick up and understand. And something that's interesting about like the Bible or any of these other religious texts is just about anybody from, the highest austere scholars who are the most knowledgeable about philosophy and how people think and whatnot, to the lowliest man who is just capable of reading, can read the book and pull stuff out of it. And it's almost easier for... It is not really the best way to put this. It's almost easier for less intelligent people to read the Bible and understand it than it is for incredibly intelligent people, because incredibly intelligent people tend to overthink it. The story of Cain and Abel is really just a story about how murder is bad and how all humans that are born into this world, all true humans, because Adam and Eve were both created, they weren't born, so they're not quite human in the conventional sense. All modern humans have this capability of evil in them, and because Cain murders his brother because he was jealous, and it's a story about he should not get jealous and stuff. There's so many meanings that you can get out of just this really, really short story of Cain and Abel. That being said, on a higher level, it's also talking about how you must make the right sacrifices, and the world is not going to tell you what those right sacrifices are, and sometimes life's just a bitch, and it doesn't matter what you do, you'll never get it right. It kind of gets into these like really, really complex things that suddenly complicate the story that really is just about, ultimately, don't murder people and don't allow jealousy to control your emotions. Be happy with what you have. Don't, be upset that somebody else gets something nicer because for whatever reasons, you don't know what they're doing exactly. Just try to live your best life. Let them have their successes. You go ahead and work on yourself. It's a very, very simple story, but you could very much read into it a lot, and a lot of that is due to its very poetic wordings and poetic nature of the story. That being said, I wanted to get into some manly poems. These are poems that are very much dedicated towards like war, hard work, standing up against adversity, and pushing through. Some examples would be like some ways that poetry can explain these hard concepts. If you want to know what it's like to, be told to go die in a war and, follow those orders to the letter, read the Light Brigade. It's a story of 600 men who charged into certain doom, knowing full well that they were going to die. But they went ahead and did it anyway for their king and country, and they would all die as heroes. If you want to know how to woo a lady and express your feelings of just over infatuation to the point of insanity, just read the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. Both of them, Romeo and Juliet, are absolutely insane, star-crossed lovers, and they have no idea what they're getting into, but it's very pretty the way that they describe it, and their skyrocketing hormonal emotions that they have zero control over. Bonus, with anything Shakespeare, just read Shakespeare in general for like some of the best insults. The bard is probably one of the best wordsmiths in the world, and his insults are just absolutely amazing. And then a poem that I was actually planning on reading today, if you want to explain to a boy or your son what it's like to be a man, go ahead and read them the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. I'm not going to go through a bunch of poems. I'm only going to go through like a couple, but this is one that I did feel like I wanted to share, as it is pertained to a lot of the topics that I wish to discuss on my podcast, and I hope that you are going to enjoy. So this is If. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or be lied about, don't deal in lies, or be hated, don't give way to hating, and yet you don't look too good, nor to talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave life to broken and stoop to build 'em up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtues, or walk with kings nor lose your common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. That's probably one of my favorite poems. I've only discovered it recently, but it is incredibly impactful, and it does partially make me wish that I was having a son. But I'm not going to tell you what it means, as poetry is very something. I ain't got no good language. Poetry is very personal to those who read it. That's one of the beauties of poetry, and why it's so approachable is the fact that, like most art forms, there are no wrong answers with something it represents. That being said, ideally you want people in the ballpark of a certain meaning, and obviously this one is talking about, what it's like to be a man. And it points out a lot of the contradictions and the pressures and the balancing act that men have to deal with on a regular basis. And it is an incredibly tough balance that you will more than likely get wrong on multiple occasions throughout your life. I don't think I've met anybody who has managed to get the balance between keeping control of your emotions and not letting people get away with anything, while at the same time not becoming the things that they tend to hate. It's a beautiful poem that really encapsulates what it's like to live life as a man, and it is a good poem to read to a adolescent who's about to enter manhood, so that way they kind of can get an idea of what they're about to get themselves into. Examples of how you should be acting gracefully when somebody is shouting in your face and hating you, If you can be hated, or if you can be hated but don't give way to hate. That's basically talking about how, like, if somebody can, basically become your arch enemy and yet you still forgive them because they're just human and they don't understand, kind of thing. That's an important message to give to people, as well as lose all of your winnings, on a risk, if you can make it one heap of all your winnings and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss and lose. That's specifically talking about if you can be willing to make risky decisions and to 100% go all in on whatever decision you make, and then when you learn that you are wrong on your decision and it ends up ending tragically and you lose everything, being able to start again and learn from the mistake. Without taking the loss too hard. That's another important lesson. It's one that I've recently experienced. So that's kind of just what that I pulled from that poem. I'm sure you all would have pulled more from it, and I'm pretty sure you would have pulled everything from it had I read it more thoroughly. There's some other versions that you can find on YouTube and stuff of more professional and more articulate speakers reading these poems. That sounds far better than what I can do. But since you're here and you are partially a captive audience, I'm going to enthrall you with another poem. This one is Invictus by William something. 1 second. I gotta look that up again. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, or charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Firstly, I want to say that Invictus is fucking metal. It is looking at life and just saying, bring it on. Damn the consequences. I accept them fully, and I know what I'm getting myself into. And what I feel like Henley is trying to explain on this is how you should live your life to the fullest without worry about the end, because the end is going to come for us anyway. Death comes for us all. What matters more, or what matters is not how death comes for you, but that when it comes, you accept it with grace, and you know that you've lived your life to the fullest. After all, you are the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. You're the one who ultimately gets to decide how you live your life, what decisions you make, and how you're going to make an impact on the world. So just go out and do it. There's nothing holding you back. Those decisions are yours and yours alone, and literally nothing can take those away. The only thing that can do is punish you for after the fact. And it's like my second favorite poem. Like I said, it's fucking metal. So there's a ton of different types of poems. These ones were definitely rhyming poems. The first one played with a lot of... the first one was like an octet, I want to say. My poetry knowledge is a little bit limited. I need to definitely do more research on that front. And the second one was quartets. A series of quartets that kind of went out into rhyming quartets, where it was A-B rhymes and stuff like that. And but poems don't have to rhyme. Poetry is playing with how our linguistics work, how we use syntax, how we use patterns, how we use syllables and stuff like that. And speaking to syllables, another type of poem that we can do is haikus, which is a Japanese poem that was especially used by samurai. Harken back to my last podcast. If you want to live like a samurai, write haikus. It was a way to help calm the soldier's mind as well as to help focus their thinking, because haikus are very, very strict in they have to use exact syllable count, 575, 3 lines, and your entire thought or the entire thing that you're wanting to convey has to fit in that structure. And you can get a lot out of that simple structure. It was especially important for samurai because it forced them to really hone in on the specific things when it comes to a problem or when it comes to their thinking. Samurai were very, very point blank. They always wanted to get directly to the point. They did not enjoy dancing around a subject or effectively talking like a politician. They were warriors. They were objective focused, and haikus really helped narrow it down. Their thinking towards specific objectives. If they wanted to describe something, they can still use flowery language, but it needed to be quick and concise. So I got a couple of haikus here. One of them I wrote, the other one I did not. We're going to start with the one that I didn't. I do not remember who this one is attributed to, but it's one that I've known forever, and it is hilarious. Haikus are easy, but they don't always make sense. Refrigerator. Again, that one is that matches perfectly. It's 575, and it also explains how haikus very easy to write. They don't always make sense, and it's very silly. The other one that I'm going to read is one that I wrote, less silly, but I'm very proud of it. I sit waiting for a chance to be a good dad for you, my daughter. Again, I'm sure if you haven't caught the hint, I am going to be a dad relatively soon, and I'm going to be a father of a daughter, and I am very excited. I feel like that poem also conveys the fact that, I have my own worries about making sure that I'm a good dad and stuff, a good father to her. So I'm trying to make sure that I am the best I can be, so that way she can learn from the best. And whatnot. Haikus are a very, very easy way and a fantastic way to, practice poetry. Again, that one focuses more on the ability to take a complex thought and bring it down to its almost most basic forms, its simplest ideas, and its most universal concepts. And I highly recommend, looking into more of them. Keep in mind, because of the way Japanese works, makes perfect sense why Japanese would decide for poetry they would do haikus, because it's very syllabic. So it's easy for them to actually convey a lot of thoughts in, 17 syllables. Because basically almost every single syllable is its own word. Whereas English, it's a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, we have a little bit more wiggle room because, for instance, a lot of people might hear girl as 2 syllables, but in reality, it's 1 syllable, same as world. It's technically 1 syllable. So we kind of get a little bit more to play around with, whereas haiku, technically 3 syllables. It is haiku, haiku. And each one of those is supposed to get the exact same amount of time dedicated to them. So it's haiku. Haiku. So it's kind of interesting thought on that. Just me nerding out a little bit on linguistics. But yeah, I highly recommend looking into haikus. Keep in mind, haikus in Japanese probably don't translate very well into English, and vice versa. But there's plenty of English haikus out there that are fantastic, and you can read a Japanese haiku and then just have it translated so you know exactly what it means, and then appreciate the beauty of how they spoke it. So some of the reasons why I feel like poetry really needs to be kind of in a man's life is poetry helps a lot with thinking. It helps a lot with processing complex emotions. It, whatever you're going through in your life, happy moments, sad moments, just moments of peace, feelings of clarity, feelings of horror and dread. There's probably a poem out there that describes exactly what you're thinking and or feeling, and it is an excellent way of being able to figure out how to put your complex thoughts into words. Also, taking time to actually learn and take in and allow it to become part of you can also help with your ability to communicate. It's especially good for increasing your vocabulary, your vernacular, your lexicon, as well as, allows you to start to see how you can use language creatively and be able to kind of be wittier in how you talk with people. It can help make you more charismatic and more interesting as a person. Be careful. You can very easily make yourself very pretentious. So it's a very, very fine line between being very charismatic with your intelligence and being very pretentious with your intelligence. But it can be incredibly useful for you to be able to pull out a phrase that perfectly illustrates what somebody is describing, and it's a really, really short phrase when they spent like the last 5 minutes trying to describe this complex idea to you, and you just go ahead and you describe it in one line. Also fantastic for insults. The more poetic your insult, the much more interestingly it is received, and it's hilarious when you insult somebody with very colorful language and they take it as a compliment. So it has a lot of utility in how people speak. Jordan Peterson had a podcast with an individual who has basically made it a hobby to memorize poetry. Like, he is just a literal library of just poetic thinking and stuff like that. And he has a very interesting way of how he speaks and he presents himself. He uses a very poetic cadence when he talks, and he can very quickly pull out a quote from these classic poems that describe something, and it can help increase the impact of his thoughts and his ideas and whatnot, making it very convincing. Poetry structures are also used a lot in speeches, so reading more poetry can help you realize when somebody's trying to manipulate you or trying to make a specific point, and can allow you to read more into what somebody is saying and what they're really meaning behind something, rather than just the surface level things of what they actually say. An example of this would be the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He towards like the end of the speech, he started repeating I have a dream, hence why it's called the I Have a Dream speech. And I went ahead and just got a quick snippet of it. Midway through one of the paragraphs, and then a full second paragraph, and that's it. But I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. So there is a lot of poetic language just in that little snippet alone, and it talks about so much, and it's a very brief portion of his speech. He repeats, I have a dream, emphasizing that it is his ultimate goal that we live in a nation that is peaceful, with it between its cultures and its people, that we all see each other as the same rather than different groups of people that need to be treated differently and whatnot. He also takes some time to lay down some harsh words to the governor of Alabama. Talks about how one day he can still have his dream even seen in what he obviously sees as one of the worst places of racism in the country at the time. So poetry is incredibly important and incredibly helpful to a man's life. It is, again, it's probably like the noblest pursuit in all of writing, and being able to take the time to actually master poetry as a skill it's a meta skill. It'll help you with mastery in so many other areas of your life. It'll help you master speech writing and creative thinking, as well as even critical thinking, and how you communicate with others. It'll affect your charisma and your it can alter the way you see the world, and it can help you learn how to persuade people into seeing the world similarly. So that's kind of my thoughts on poetry. I hope you understand a little bit more about it, and I hope that you will take the time to show some appreciation. And there is homework. If you genuinely want to get better as being a man, after all, the direction this channel and this podcast has been going towards is very much higher level thinking, very philosophical in how to be a man. There's plenty of channels out there that focus exclusively on specific skill sets, how to build your daily routine, how to get girls, how to make money, stuff like that. And I wanted to focus more on a more philosophical, spiritual, emotional, kind of higher level stuff. About what it means to be a man, and how you can make sure you are the best man possible across the board, not just in a few areas, and to try to help shape the culture around men and how they operate. So you're going to get some homework. If you're genuinely serious about being a better man, I want you to read one poem a day. You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I'm doing the exact same thing. As of recording this, I went ahead and posted a poem called, if I can find it, called Dawn by Arthur Rimbaud. Yesterday, I went ahead and posted Invictus. And I will be sharing one poem a day. The second part of this, because this is a 2-part assignment, is you must write at least one poem a month. It's not enough just to read it. Also take some time to express your thoughts in a poetic way. These don't have to be perfect poems. I'm not expecting you to be the next Shakespeare or the next Langston Hughes or anything like that. Just taking the time to write some of your thoughts. Doesn't matter how silly it is, how emotional, how descriptive it is. Just taking the time to write a poem. Could be a couplet, literally 2 lines. They just happen to rhyme. That's it. Could be, a full-on prose of a crazy long story that is written with poetic language and, describes a story of something. Just taking the time to actually sit down and write some poetry, I think, will do wonders for you. I genuinely think it'll boost your mood. It'll help you process complex emotions. Poetry is probably one of the best ways to deal with hardship, such as, the loss of a family member, some loss of a job, an emotional breakup, stuff like that. Poetry can seriously help you get through that. And it can just help you kind of see the world in different ways. A lot of poetry is hilarious. So taking the time to read some poetry can also boost your humor and whatnot. I am going to go a little bit harsher on myself. I'm reading one poem a day, same as you guys. And like I said, as proof, I'm going to be sharing those poems. But I'm also going to be writing one poem a week, and I will be sharing those on Fridays. So Arguably, I have already written one for this week, the haiku that I wrote. So I'm going to go ahead and count that as the poem that I wrote this week. But yeah, you'll see every Friday a poem that I've written myself, along with the poem that I read that day. Read as much poetry as you can. Doesn't even have to be exclusively English. Read African poetry, read Asian poetry, read Australian poetry, South American poetry. It is the most I believe it is like the most universal art form that we have that can seriously convey ideas and emotions and meaning in the world. Because it doesn't matter even if you can't see, even if you can't hear, if you can read, you can understand somebody's thoughts. Anyway, those are my thoughts on poetry. I hope that you will take some time to actually look into poetry and to take some time to master it. I'm hoping that I can create a bunch of warrior poets, especially because there's nothing more satisfying than a witty one-liner when you take out your nemesis. So I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Feel free to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on, Spotify, Stitcher, Rumble, or YouTube. Here pretty soon, I think I'm actually going to start also making videos and stuff, not just posting the audio with the background of my logo, but also like actually seeing my face and whatnot. That being said, that might be a little bit of time just because I also got a lot of complicated things going on in my life, a lot of logistics that I got to work out. So we'll see how soon I can get on that. But again, like, subscribe. If you've made it to this far of the podcast with my ramblings, I want you to go ahead and down below comment. Let's see. Comment the word scroll. Yeah, we're gonna go with that. Comment the word scroll. No context. Just put it down at the very bottom. Don't explain it to anybody. Let people wonder what's going on and why there's people commenting the word scroll underneath this video or this podcast. That'll also help me out. And then, of course, if you can share this with any of your friends who you think this might be helpful towards, that would also be appreciated. But thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my rambles. And I will see you all or talk to you all in the next one. Take care.